Welcome to the speaker series on a shot glass of recovery.
Yeah. Yeah. You get a house, you get a car, then you start thinking that's all you are, but you don't know the truth. So let me spell it out for you. Now I got your attention, now there's a start. Now sit and listen to my favorite part. Life's been giving us some clues. The answer lies inside of your.
Welcome to a shot glass of recovery, the speaker series. I'm your host, Lisa M. This is where we share powerful, real stories from the speakers of AA Solution Seekers Toronto, my home group. People who are living the solution and walking the path of recovery one day at a time. If something you hear here resonates with you, we invite you to show your support by dropping $1 or $2 into our PayPal virtual basket. It helps us keep carrying the message and making these recordings available to others who may need them. Now let's get into today's speaker.
Hey everybody, I'm an alcoholic. My name's Matt.
Hi, Matt.
Matt Wunderlich. Actually, it was funny. Whoever got a hold of my phone number and reached out to ask me if I could be of service to your group, and I thank you for allowing me to be of service. She thought my name was Eureka. We actually live in Eureka, Missouri, so I thought that was pretty funny. Yeah. So, but my name is Matt, not Eureka. So, but you can find us in Eureka, Missouri. My wife is here too. She's one of us. And we also have our dog with us, you guys. So I'm hoping this goes okay because he is not used to me speaking on meetings at home, and he's got quite the personality. So if he starts to get out of control, she'll take him outside. So anyhow, it's good to be here. I do have a home group. My home group is group 1182. We call ourselves the Slow Learners. We meet on Monday nights at 6:00. Like I said, we're in Eureka, Missouri, so we are Central Time. We unfortunately we are not. There is no Zoom link or access to our group. But if you're ever in Missouri and Central, well, I should say the central part of the United States, but in the St. Louis area, we're about 45 minutes southwest of St. Louis. Please get a hold of me, and I would love to bring you to my home group or meet you there if you're there in town on a Monday night. And maybe, I don't know, maybe you guys will be. I'm kind of looking far ahead here, but in 2030, so in 4 years now, not that far away, the International is going to be here in St. Louis. So hopefully some of you will be able to attend that. We're really looking forward to that. There's a lot of history here when it comes to Alcoholics Anonymous in the St. Louis area in particular. We have on average around 650 meetings a week within a 50-mile radius of where we live. So AA is definitely rooted in the St. Louis area. And so many people have recovered here in Alcoholics Anonymous, and families have recovered too. And sorry, I get a little emotional. Our family has definitely recovered. It's I'm a husband. I'm a brother. I'm a stepdad. I'm an employee. I'm a friend. I'm a sponsor. I'm a sponsee. I'm a godfather to a beautiful girl. I'm a cyclist. My wife will tell you I probably ride the bike too much. And I can go on and on, but before I'm any of those things, I'm a sober member. There you go. But before I'm any of those things, I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I know that only by the grace of God and the help of a lot of people, I have been gifted the life that I have today. And it's just, I say it all the time, but miracles do happen, and they happen specifically here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And, I believe that we are here, meaning all of us, because somebody prayed for us. And I know that to be true. And I was blessed with the gift of sobriety on April 30th of 2010. And interestingly enough, I turned 49 yesterday, which is just a shock to me that I've made it to 49 years old. And, I sobered up when I was 33. And so, again, as a result of being a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I get to have these things. My 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 grandmother, God, who I just love dearly, she was she was somebody who I developed a very close relationship with in sobriety. And so she was in her during for her career, she was a cook. She was actually a head cook for a home that was run by nuns, and they took in troubled youth. And they took in battered children and abused children and all sorts of, dysfunctional. I don't want to say dysfunctional people, but people that were living dysfunctional lives as a result of things that had happened to them that they didn't deserve. And so, but I have to say, my birthday was yesterday, and you guys, I grew up on this apple cake, and I have to tell, and she made the icing. And the icing, you probably can't, but it was like this thick on the cake, and I loved it. And my wife and her, when my wife and her got to know each other, it took a little bit of time before my grandmother was willing to break out her recipe book, but she did eventually, and that was a sign that she really liked Kay. And then she taught her over the course of about 3 years how to make that cake. And it's just really neat because she passed away back in June at 99 years old. And it was one of the most beautiful things that I have ever experienced, especially in sobriety. I was her caretaker for the better part of 15 years. She didn't live with us. She was able to live on her own all the way to the end, except for the last 6 months. We had to put her in assisted living, but she was by far the one with the most spunk at that age to go into an assisted living, but to be with her and to be present for her for these last 15 years, and for you guys to give that to me, it was just amazing. There was a lot of prayer. There was a lot of Alcoholics Anonymous. She got to meet a lot of you over the years. Kay was able to bring her to a meeting when I celebrated 12 years of sobriety, and it was just so neat. And we got married back in 23, like it was so long ago. And we got married. We spent a lot of time in the mountains, and we got married out in Colorado. And man, Alcoholics Anonymous was there in full force. We had countless people that traveled all the way to Colorado for us, and they, Kay with their help, Kay was able to get her there, and it was just so incredible to have her there. It was so funny, you guys. Like, I have found God here in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I will speak to that. And I was able to build a relationship with her, especially the last 15 years, through God and through our relationship with God. And we got married in this wedding venue that was so neat, and it kind of resembled a chapel in a sense. I mean, it looked out over a mountain range in Estes Park, and I'll never forget, as we were welcoming people into the venue, I was behind my grandmother, and she was talking to her niece who was there. My grandmother was 97 at that point. Her niece, my aunt, was like in her 70s. And she leaned over to her, and my grandma didn't see very well, but she saw well enough to tell her. She said, "This isn't a church." She said it under her breath. And I said, "That's okay, Grandma, because I assure you that God is here." And she said, "I know that because I can feel his presence." And just to have, be there, obviously, me and Kay and our sponsors were there. Our grand sponsors were there. My sponsor just celebrated 30 years of sobriety. He is part of our home group, and my grand sponsor and his wife, they were there as well. We were actually just up in Vancouver for the international. I'm sure some of you were there, and And so I was able to be there with my wife and my grand sponsor and his wife and her sponsor for the first like 15 years of her life. Kay's sponsor was there, and there were so many of us there from the St. Louis area. And he what I was getting to is he was 2 weeks shy of celebrating 50 years, my grand sponsor. And it's funny because the old timers section, if you've ever been to an international, it used to be you had to have 45 years of sobriety to sit in the old timers section. And the last international, he was just shy of that, and then COVID happened, and then he was really looking forward to being able to sit in the old timer section this international, but then they moved it to 50 years of sobriety, and he was 2 weeks shy of it. But it was so neat. We got to celebrate his 50 years of sobriety back here in St. Louis after we came home, and that meeting is an hour meeting, and you guys, it lasted for 2.5 hours. The old timers, if you've ever been around old timers, they don't get in a hurry. And I understand why, today. And so everybody that came to that meeting was given an opportunity to say something. And so, yeah, it was a 2.5. It was the longest meeting I think I've ever been in, but it was well worth it. So anyways, what can I say? I mean, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was dying from alcoholism and drug addiction. The book, it describes it very well. It says we were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were a prey to misery and depression. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We couldn't seem to be of real help to anybody else. And, I don't really need to get into much more about what my life used to look like other than that's a perfect description of what my life had become. I was stealing food to feed myself, and that had been going on for quite some time. And everything that I owned, I kept in a trash bag. And I had a 18-year run where I became paralyzed by alcohol and other substances. And I was at a place that morning where the book, he talks about it in the book where, we could be at the jumping off point. We could wish for the end. And 6 months prior to me surrendering to alcoholism and drug addiction, I did make that decision to end my life. And I went through with the process of attempting to do so. My wife, she's a nurse practitioner.
Inside the BSP model, and it teaches everything YouTube. But for sake of time, and I've already been filming for 5 hours, we're going to jump to profit. Now, there are lots of ways to make money as a content creator. You have.
Are we back? Yes, we're back. So, sorry. So, I definitely was at that place where I was wishing for the end, and I made an attempt to do so. And that's another reason why I say that sobriety truly is a gift, because most people do not make it when they do what I attempted to do to myself. So, fast forward 6 months from that moment, and like Bill describes in his story, and I don't think you'll really, my opinion, will ever find a better description of step one, but he says, no words can tell of the loneliness and despair I felt in the bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I was overwhelmed. I met my match. Alcohol was my master. And I had never heard those words. I had never read this book when I felt that, but that's how I felt the morning of April 30th of 2010. There was no indication or no notion in my mind that I was about to surrender to this thing, but that's absolutely what happened. That morning, I picked up, I couldn't believe it. I still had a phone. Alcoholics are incredibly resourceful, I think, at times, and how I still had a phone that actually worked is beyond me. And even more so that there was people that were willing to take a phone call from me, because I had truly become isolated at that point. Alcoholism got me right where it wanted to get me. It wanted to get me alone, and that's what it did. I gave away everyone and everything I ever claimed to care about for my right to drink. And but by the grace of God, there was a couple people out there that were willing to take a phone call from me, and And I dialed one of those numbers, and that person picked up the phone, and I said the 3 words that forever changed my life. I mean, those words were, "I need help." And I had never brought myself to a place where I could say those words. And I mean, I guess, to be honest, it's, pride and ego, which I learned through these steps that were driving a lot of that, and fear, primarily fear. For some reason, I have this thing about me where I don't want anyone to think I don't know what I'm doing. I was afraid to ask questions. I'm afraid to walk around and act as if I don't know what I'm doing. And it got me right where it got me, and I've seen the best I have to offer. Left on my own, I'm stealing food to feed myself, and I'm living out of a trash bag. And I've destroyed every relationship that, I ever claimed to care about. That's the best I have to offer. And so he asked me when I told him I need help, "Where are you?" And I told him where I was at. And he said, "Can you hold on?" And I said, "I will try." And so it wasn't much longer. He was at the place that I was squatting in, if you want to call it that. And, it's interesting, my wife probably gets a kick out of me wearing a suit around the house. I assure you, it's not something that I typically do. However, if I'm ever asked to share in a meeting, I will wear a suit. But then, like I said, I kept everything I had in the trash bag, and whatever I did have, was barely held together. There was lots of holes in my clothes, and they were not washed, and I did not wash myself. I had scars and scabs and cuts all over me. But when this person came to the place that I was at, he did something that, again, altered my life forever. And he put his arms around me and gave me a hug. And I have to tell you that that's the first time I can remember in a long time where I had felt unconditional love from somebody, and I felt like I was not being judged, because I truly walked around either judging others or feeling like I had been judged. And so we went upstairs and talked for a while. I'm one of those people that when I drink the way I drink, it can go on for long periods of time. When I will talk to people that aren't there, I will see things that aren't there. Psychosis sets in, and that's a place that I had been living in for quite some time, was a state of psychosis. But I knew that I had somebody in front of me that was real and that cared and that wanted to help. And so what came from that was we made a few phone calls, and I found myself in his vehicle, and he was taking me to drug and alcohol treatment not too far from where I was at. And for the first time, I got around some people where I was willing to be honest with them. And I got around some professionals that saw that not only did I need drug and alcohol treatment, but that I needed medical attention quickly. And so they took me by ambulance to a state-funded psychiatric hospital not too far from here. Again, that's why I think I feel so close to the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, is that they too found themselves in places like that. And I'm so grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous, because a lot of people never made it out of those places. And because of Alcoholics Anonymous, we get a chance to live these great lives. And so that's where I was taken to, where a team of doctors and nurses and just a whole assortment of staff really worked on me hard for several days and got me stabilized. And I was able to, start thinking about life and start thinking about some things that I had allowed to define me. And those were 2 events that took place in my life. I grew up in a small town not too far from here. My father was a police officer. My mother worked as a secretary at a car dealership, and I have a brother who's 15 months younger than I. And what I can say is that I felt the most love I've ever felt being around those 3 people. It was a very loving home, and we spent a lot of time together. And things changed pretty quickly. We got news when I was 14 years old that my father was diagnosed with cancer. And within a year, my father passed away from cancer. And I was at the age of 15. And, I don't know how else to say it other than it literally was like somebody, I'm a former United States Marine. And I guess I use this analogy because it makes sense to me, but it was as if somebody walked into our home and pulled the pin on a grenade and walked out. Our home just was destroyed. Our family life was destroyed. We all took it in all of our different ways. I turned to alcohol and drugs. I took my first drink 2 weeks after my father passed away. And so I thought about that a lot. that day while I was in the hospital, and I thought about my mother, who was one of us. I didn't know that until after I came in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. But she was somebody that, you would see come around and get 30 days sober, 60 days, 90 days. Things start to change. And then, like the book says, thanks for the information. And then you don't see them anymore. And that ultimately sealed her fate. She committed suicide in 2008. So 2 years prior to me sobering up. And I'll tell you, I mean, that night I was in a bar drinking, not too many hours after they had taken her out of her place. And so, these were the things that if you had lived the way I had lived, if you had experienced what I had experienced in life, then you too would feel justified for living the life that I was living, and I fell into self. I fell into self-pity. And our book talks about, self-centeredness. And that was truly me, And so, through the hospital stay, I found some hope in there. And what I found in there was that I was willing to do whatever it took not to go back to living the way I was living. And so from there, the people that brought me there were able to pick me up and take me back to drug and alcohol treatment. And I spent the next 30 days in a drug and alcohol treatment facility where I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. And, you guys mentioned hope at the beginning of your meeting. And that truly is what I find in Alcoholics Anonymous. I have never found any other organization. I've just never found any other type of group of people where hope has struck me like it struck me in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. To see people carrying the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, to see people reaching their hand out to others who are dying from this thing, to see people willing to do whatever they can to help the next alcoholic find recovery. It truly is. It's the greatest thing that I have ever been a part of and that I ever care to be a part of. And so, it's my book. You can probably see it here, but it's my sponsor told me it's time for a new book. But this one's pretty special to me, as you can see. But, it talks about in here, if you are seriously alcoholic as we are, we believe there is no middle of the road solution. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible. And if we had passed into the region in which there is no return through human aid, we had but two alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation the best we can. And the other is to accept spiritual help. And, when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous and I got around all of you, you mentioned prayer. There was lots of that. There's lots of that in meetings here. You talk about God, and there's lots of talk of God and our creator, a higher power here. And I saw peace and happiness and joy in all of you people. And I got to say, it really made me sick. I was somebody who, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I had lost the ability to smile. There was no smiling going on anymore. In fact, my sponsor had to work on me quite a long time on the smile thing, and maybe I'll get to that. But I truly thought when I got here that I had overreacted about my situation, and maybe I don't need to be here with all of you if this means that I'm going to be talking about God and I'm going to be involved in prayer and steps and all the things that we do. And it's just, that's why I find alcoholism so fascinating, that as bad as things got, and they got horribly bad, there was still a part of my mind that said, well, if this is what I am going to have to do to recover, I'm out. And I'm so grateful that I had found desperation in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I had reached that place, faced with alcoholic destruction. We soon become as open-minded on spiritual matters as we try to be in others. In this respect, alcohol is a great persuader. It finally beat me into a state of reasonableness. So, there is no secret as to how I found God in Alcoholics Anonymous. It came through these steps. It came through good sponsorship. It came through people who were being demonstrations that had come before me. And all those things, it became very attractive to me, to where I was, and to this day, willing to go to any length to get it. And so, I know this approach doesn't work with everybody, but surely worked for me. And I don't cuss, so don't worry, I'm not going to. try not to, but when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I thought I had, I was riding this train of the poor me thing and all the self-pity and talking about the two events that I shared with you guys. And I got in some meetings and I thought I had a lot to say. And unfortunately they were stupid enough to call on me and turn that robot off. I'm so sorry, you guys. She's got this thing in here that's telling us what the weather is right now. It's 80 degrees here if anybody cares to know. So, um, but I thought I had a lot to say and truly I didn't, and I was holding meetings hostage and I was not talking about steps or recovery. And my sponsor walked me outside one day and he was not yet my sponsor, but he was somebody that I grew up with his children. And I had seen miracles take place in that family's life through Alcoholics Anonymous. And lo and behold, God put that person in front of me when I came in. And he took me outside one day and I asked him if he'd be willing to walk me through this book and take me through these steps. And he said, I will, under a few conditions. And I said, okay, what are one of those? And I remember him saying, shut the up and sit down and listen. And if they're stupid enough to call on you, you announce yourself as an alcoholic. You congratulate anybody who's celebrating an anniversary. So if there's anybody out there celebrating anniversaries, congratulations. If there's any newcomers, you welcome them. And if there's any newcomers here, I welcome you to Alcoholics Anonymous. And from that point on, you say that I have been instructed by my sponsor to just listen. And he says that he told me, please shut up.
Yeah.
I don't quite remember that. But anyhow, if anybody else would have talked to me like that prior to Alcoholics Anonymous, there would have been consequences of some type for speaking to me in that manner. But I'm so grateful that he did, because unbeknownst to me, that forever changed my life in so many ways. It set me on a path of not thinking about myself so much and starting to think about others. And it started with me being told to sit at the front door of one of our offices here, our AA offices, and greet people and greet them with a handshake, and welcome them to Alcoholics Anonymous. Let them know what your name is. Ask them what their name is. And if they care to tell you a little bit more about them, stick around to hear them talk about themselves. And I did those things. And he also said, I don't ever want to see you in a meeting without a smile on your face. So it took a little while for that to happen, but I eventually started to smile, you guys. And I've been told I have a pretty good smile. So I like to hold a smile. It actually comes from a true place of joy today. It really does, But, I was the guy gritting my teeth. I was very unapproachable when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I tell people all the time, please don't be scared to look past the rough exterior of a newcomer and see the person that's truly dying and scared to death inside. And that was me. And you guys were willing to look past that rough exterior and continue to reach your hand out to me. And, I love, our book says the verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men and women have faith, have courage. They trust their God. They never apologize for God. Instead, they let him demonstrate through us what he can do. And, what you all have done for me has been demonstrations of what God can do in the lives of people such as ourselves. And everything that I am today, everything that I've learned that is of any value in life, I've learned here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've learned by sitting at the front door of meeting halls and shaking people's hands, and eventually getting to know people and building relationships with people that are unshakable. I have relationships today in Alcoholics Anonymous that I never saw that coming. When I said I need help, almost 16 years ago, I had no idea what was on the other end of that. So I will tell you that prayer is a big part of my life. It's a big part of our life. It's something that was very foreign to me. I was very ignorant towards it coming into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had a real hatred towards God. I will say that. And it's because of the reasons that I shared with you, And so, through steps 1 and step 2, I started to become willing to believe that maybe there is something out there that's pointing me in the right direction. And I saw it working in my sponsor's life, and I saw it working in the lives of all of you, because you told me it was working in your life, and you showed me how it was working in your life, and you showed me how it was working in your family's lives. You welcomed me into your homes. You took me to places to eat, and you did all these things where, I couldn't deny the truth when I saw it. And through that, I started talking to this grandmother of mine Opal was her name, about this God that I was trying to develop a relationship with, and what she called classes. She would always say, "Are you still going to those classes?" And I always got a kick out of that, you know. I mean, it does say it's a textbook, and so it truly is for me. It's designed for living, and it, you know, it really is a classroom for me. Um, but you know, we were able to get on the subject of God, and we were able to get on the subject of why I developed a separation with God, and she always remained very strong in her faith as long as I can ever remember. She used to have to pay me to go sit in church and be quiet. You guys, I remember she'd give me like $1 to sit next to her in church, and she would hand me mints, and she would just pat on my knee just to kind of try to keep me calm. And my grandpa would be out. Back then you could smoke in the atriums, and my grandpa was a smoker, and he'd be out in the atrium smoking cigarettes. And go figure, where did I want to be? I wanted to be out there with him. But I guess she knew where I needed to be, and little did I know that the seed of God and the seed of faith was being planted in me. And so through these steps, through prayer, through seeing the door open for other people, and the door started to open for me, and I started talking to her about, like I said, this hatred, and it all was rooted in one particular day. I was coming home from school. My father was taking treatment for cancer, but he was still able to get out. He was a jogger, and he liked to jog. And there's a church right behind our house. And, you know, prayer was nothing that was ever really common in our household. It was if we were with grandma and grandpa, but it was never when we were just a singular family. And I could never really speak to why. And I never really knew where my family stood on faith, even though they sent me to Lutheran schools. And that, I mean, that really means nothing, but it means something to me that they thought something enough that they were sending me to a place where there was talk of God. And I was telling my grandmother that I saw him walk into this church one day, and I was coming from school, and a pastor had opened the door for him. And my father was out on a jog. He was in his running clothes, and I never asked my father what that was. And, you know, it wasn't, you know, much longer. 6 months later, he passed away. And I said, and that's where I developed this hatred, Grandma, that he walked in there begging for his life, and this is what we got, you know. And she stopped me, and she says, "You don't remember?" And I said, "Remember what?" And she said, "The funeral." My father was a police officer. He was buried and he was military, so he's buried at a national cemetery out here, a very big one in the St. Louis area. You know, it was a big funeral. There was military personnel and, you know, rifles and police officers and the whole thing. And it was, you know, I guess you could say quite traumatic and quite traumatic for me. And then 18 years of alcoholism and drug addiction. There was a lot of things that I had forgotten or never really just processed. And she told me the story of the pastor that gave my father's funeral. And it was the pastor that welcomed my father into the church that day. And he went on to talk about this man, my father, who came to him one day, knocked on the church door and asked if he could come in and speak to him about some things. And the pastor said, "Absolutely, I actually have some time." And he welcomed him in, and he said, "Tell me a little about yourself." And my father told him he was a police officer, and, you know, he's a father of 2 children that he loves, and a husband, and a son-in-law, and all these things. And he said, "Okay, that's so good to hear." And he goes, "Tell me why you're here." And my father got it to why he was there. And he said, "Well, I've been given this news that, you know, I don't have much longer to live. And if you would, Pastor, I would like for you to pray with me." And the pastor said, "Absolutely." And my father said, and he said, "What do you want to pray for?" And he said, "Pray that my family will be okay after I leave this place." And it just, my grandma's telling me all this, and it's like these years of hatred and alcoholism that had developed in my life based off this assumption that I thought my father went in there for, and it was all a lie. You know, and it talks about that in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, that some of us alcoholics live in this world of that's a little exaggerated or distorted. And God, that's so true in my life, you know. But I can tell you immediately, I felt the presence of God in that moment. And I knew in that moment that God had been with me this whole time. And he actually answered my father's prayers. And so you guys gave me that. You guys gave me that. And from that point on, you know, this relationship that I had been running from with God, I started running in the other direction. I started running towards God. And I've been on that path ever since. And I see it in so many places. I see it in my marriage. I see it in the men that I sponsor. I see it with my sponsor. You know, we always take an opportunity whenever we walk a sponsee through the steps to involve. There's a prayer in every step in this book. And if you don't have a sponsor that's pointing that out to you, then I recommend that you find one that will do that. Because if you're anybody like me who had no idea how to pray or build a relationship with God, that's what these steps are here for. It says this book is to enable me to find a power greater than myself, which will solve my problem. And my problem is me. And that's just all there is to it. I don't get it twisted. I don't get it twisted in so many ways, and what I know is that you all don't need me. I need Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's all there is to it, and so from that, this beautiful life has been created, I, my sponsor told me a lot of things in early sobriety that would happen if I was willing to do what it is that we do in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, Matt, you will find yourself, sitting in a meeting one day, all up in your head, and that has happened. And for whatever reason, they will call on you in that meeting, and you'll have an opportunity to share, and you'll be sharing on recovery because at that point you have recovered. And after that meeting, there's going to be an individual that's going to walk up to you dying from alcoholism and drug addiction. And for whatever reason, out of all the 50 people that were in that meeting that day, this person was listening to what you were saying for whatever reason. And they will walk up to you, they will reach their hand out to you, and they will ask you for help. And in that moment, your life will forever change. And that's exactly what has happened. You can't give me a drink or a shot of dope or a pill or anything that has made me feel any better than when another alcoholic walks up to me and reaches their hand out and says, I'm dying from this thing. Will you please help me? I don't know what I'm doing. And it's the most incredible feeling. I become electrified in Alcoholics Anonymous when that happens, because everything that I have been through in my life, it wasn't for nothing. There was purpose as long as I stay here in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so, it says, cling to the thought that in God's hands, your dark past is the greatest possession you hold, the key to life and happiness for others. With it, you can avert death and misery for them. Now, I know that doesn't mean that I have the power to get anybody sober, and I don't have the power to get anybody drunk, but I absolutely can be there and make myself available to the next newcomer, the next alcoholic that walks in here dying from this thing, because that's when miracles happen. That's when this book becomes something so much bigger than what it is just in these pages. It becomes alive, and I become alive, and I become someone who I feel like is closer to walking the path that God had intended me to walk. And so, I'm all these things. I get to be all these things. We get to travel all over the United States. We get to travel all over. We got to go to Paris for our honeymoon. And for a guy that used to live out of a trash bag, to find myself in Paris, of all places, walking through the streets of Paris with my wife to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was the most incredible feeling and experience I've ever had. There was people there from all over the world in that meeting. And it was just so neat to see this thing alive and well out there. We got to go to meet in Geneva, Switzerland. There was people there from Russia. And the girl had a book from Russia, an Alcoholics Anonymous book in Russian. I mean, to think that this thing has touched the lives of so many people across the world and that I get to be a part of it, it truly is amazing. So I will shut up with this. It says in that book, when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all-powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, the hereafter. We were reborn. And because of all of you, I have been reborn in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm going to hold on to this thing. I say this jokingly, but I really mean it. You will not take my seat from me in Alcoholics Anonymous. I have earned this seat, and I am holding on to it. So thank you so much. I'm grateful for you guys allowing me to be of service tonight. And I think you guys are up in Toronto. We look forward to getting up into Toronto sometime in the near future, we will make that happen. So, and please come to St. Louis in 2030. We'll be here welcoming you. So thank you.
Just a quick reminder to subscribe, like, or follow if you like the show on any of your favorite listening platforms. If you like the speakers and other content on the podcast, please show us some love by leaving a review and consider making a PayPal contribution to help keep the show going at paypal.me/a shot glass of recovery. Every dollar makes a difference, and we thank you. Our speakers come from my AA home group, AA Solution Seekers. We meet every day at 7 a.m., so pop in sometime and say hello. Until next time, thanks for joining me on A Shot Glass of Recovery.
Everything you do, the answer lies inside you.